I used to be a politician in the UK. I was the anti-war candidate for the Iraq War.
I didn't
And
know
then,
that, Nadia.
oh, yeah, yeah. I stood for Parliament for over 20 years for the UK. I said I stood for against the war in Iraq. That was my first time I really went into politics. We all knew that was a lie, didn't we? And a million Iraqis had died, and yeah, I think was it 4,000 servicemen were killed.
Yeah.
We lost
Yeah.
hundreds as well. And then I was a parliamentary candidate for the Liberal Democrats.
Welcome back to Kim's Breaking Point. I'm Kim, and today I'm joined with my co-host, Fem, and we also have Nadia here. She's in the UK, and she's going to be talking to us today about being on the flotillas and also Ebony's Voice, which is a nonprofit organization that she runs in the UK. Thank you so much for joining us, Nadia. I hope you're doing well.
I am, thank you, and thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. We've been looking forward to this for quite some time, ever since you were on the boats and we did our first interview, a little short interview, anyways. And we've been really excited to get you back on the podcast to hopefully talk a little bit more about your time on the flotillas. That was quite a wild ride
It
from what
was,
we've
it
heard,
was,
right?
yeah, it was. It was an adventure. Absolutely left a core memory. But, the reason why we did it was to put spotlight on Gaza, what was happening in Gaza. We weren't the story. Gaza was the story. What we tried to do was the first time so many civilians from all over the globe came together to try and deliver humanitarian aid to any conflict zone. Obviously, we know it's a genocide that's happening there. And it was, we understood the dangers that we were putting ourselves in to do this, but it needs to be done. The world leaders had failed, and it was left to the civilians to actually try and put the spotlight on and put pressure on the world government to act to bring an end to the genocide that was happening. I'm glad to say, within 2 weeks of everybody being repatriated home, coming back home, ceasefire did come into effect.
Yes, it did. So just because I'm curious, what was the planning process for you getting on the boats? Like, how did all that stuff work out for you?
To be honest, it was me and a couple of my colleagues under Ebony's Voice, and we'd watched the last flotilla get intercepted, and we've said, there needs to be about 1,000 boats going. The IOF could not intercept the whole world, and we suddenly came up with this brilliant idea of trying to organise 1,000 boats, and so we put the word out that this is what we wanted to do. And quickly people were coming back saying, actually, the flotillas are looking for participants. So I just applied online, and then I went through the vetting process. They had to do vetting on us and to make sure that we were the kind of people that, because we are non-violent, we obviously carried no weapons, but we had to, everybody on the boats, 30,000 people applied for the flotillas, and only 500 of us were accepted. And the 500 that were accepted were the best of the best. We knew how to keep our temper. We knew not to be able to retaliate the best. But, as we're getting intercepted, the IOF will try and get a reaction. People have died being on the flotillas in the past, and the best response that we can give is no response at all. And my background, I used to work in adult mental health. I'm trained up to my eyeballs in de-escalation techniques. And so I've been in situations that make the hair on the back of your neck stand up, but because of my old work experience, I felt confident enough that, my training from prior would kick in as well, being very calm. And yeah, it was. There was when we were actually being bombed in international waters, and drones were coming through the boats looking for us to drop bombs or to drop chemicals on us. As the fleet came together, we were only a couple of feet from other boats. I hadn't had a cup of coffee for about 4 days at this point on the boats. We had no milk, we had no sugar, and I can't drink pure filtered coffee just straight like that. So as the boats came together, I suddenly thought, God, I need a cup of coffee for this. So I'm asking the boats if they had a cup of sugar I could borrow, and bombs were going off around us, and nobody panics. We all kept very calm. the British humour came in for some of us, you know. So yeah, it did prove that, you know, the Flotillas did pick the right people who were managing to keep calm and things. You know, a lot of people I've met since said, "Oh, I applied," and I said, "Well, you know, the vetting policy was quite strict on who they were." And when we went there, I went on and we didn't set sail for nearly a week and a half after I arrived, because we obviously had to have training, non-violence training, which Greta did herself. And through the training experience and things, we were tested, and people from there were being, you know, people were being sent home because the training, if they weren't being able to manage or complete the training, or they had a bad reaction in the training, they were sadly the wrong people for that mission.
When you said the 25th of what month was that?
Uh,
When
August?
was that? Let's see.
Was
We're
it
August,
in
August?
August,
maybe
25th of
August. Yeah, I was
August.
going to say.
Yeah,
August?
August.
And then you said you were there for a week doing training before you
Yeah,
guys even left. Where did you leave from?
Barcelona. And
Barcelona. Okay.
the
I just want to
the
circle back around for 1 second for our viewers because it's a lot for them to digest all at once. Just to kind of explain a little bit of the backstory of the reason why the
Yes.
training was so important.
you can talk about it.
So in 2010, I believe it was was it Mavi Marmara? The Mavi Marmara was at sea with, I believe, I don't know how many activists, but I think they set sail from Turkey. There was Turkish activists and there was even some Americans on board, and they were intercepted and attacked by the IOF. And unfortunately, they did, as Nadia said, you know, they, in an act of self-defense, they tried to protect themselves from being attacked, which just escalated the situation. And it led to, I believe, 9 or 10 activists being killed on board. And it was a really, really traumatic and really sad event. So that's why it was so important that people were trained ahead of time, because like she said, this is really typical of the IOF and the way that they operate to escalate situations in order to instigate a response. So
I think something else that's really important to note, because if somebody's watching, they don't understand. This didn't happen on October 7th. This is not when this began. This has been an ongoing genocide of sorts for many, many years. And the whole fact that this other flotilla went back then is proof enough that this has been going on for a continued amount of time. And it's still going on to this day. So
There's been a siege on Gaza for over 20 years. You know, people don't seem to realize there's been a wall around Gaza, and it's been basic food items, medicine have been restricted going into Gaza for 20 years. And this is why the flotillas first started doing these aid missions, because Israel, by putting that siege on Gaza 20 years ago, is a crime against humanity. It's against international law. And so the flotillas have always tried to break the siege, you know, near enough every year. I think it's 38 missions they've done. Sadly, not all of them have even been able to leave dock or port because they've been sabotaged, either politically or the boats have been sabotaged. You know, Israel has really tried to prevent the flotillas from doing this. So with having 50 boats, you know, the organization and the logistics of this was absolutely, you know, you just couldn't believe. When I can remember saying to my colleague, who also was a member of the land team for the flotillas, because you know, this mission couldn't have happened without all the people that were fixing the boats, getting the boats ready. Obviously, we had to put supplies in. You know, we were off on training, and the boats were getting prepped and getting all the equipment that we needed. And these boats were bought cheap. We knew it may be a one-way mission, so we didn't expect the boats to be coming back. So we're getting the boats seaworthy. So when we were on training, the brilliant volunteers were doing this, were getting the boats ready for us. And, you know, it was logistics of it. It was absolutely, you know, I discovered that I wouldn't have been able to actually organize that. So I'm quite
right.
glad I would join the flotillas.
Yeah.
And
A
yeah, and
lot went
seeing it.
into that, it seems like.
Mm,
And also, so for anyone that wants to search, it was called the Global Samud Flotilla, and there were
yes.
activists from 44 different countries that all joined together and set sail to go break the siege by land, air, sea on Gaza. So really amazing. And I just wanted to ask you a little bit about when you guys departed. I know it was like really emotional for a lot of the activists and humanitarians that were heading out on the boats, because as we know from what we just talked about, people have lost their lives going on this mission before. Like, was that a thought that crossed your mind when you left? Did you have to kind of make peace with the idea that maybe you wouldn't be returning from this trip?
Yeah. I mean, many of us did wills before we left, me included. I'm a single mum. I do have older children who are adults, but I do have young children, one with a disability. He has autism. So I had to make my 19-year-old daughter his legal guardian when I was away. I made sure all the paperwork was completed. So it wasn't just we packed our bags and we went. There was a lot of home preparation and preparing that there might be a chance that we didn't come back. But I was quite confident that we would be okay secretly. I'm not suicidal. Did obviously understand the chances of being intercepted was actually a lot more higher, as long as we didn't have a loose link in the chain for the non-violence. This is where a lot of trust went into the steering committee to make sure they picked the correct people for this mission so things wouldn't escalate. But yeah, I mean, obviously it did cross our minds a couple of times, especially when we were being bombed in international waters. At that point, it was, we did think, God, we're at completely hundreds of miles away from land, and it's, if they succeed and sink one of the boats, we were ready to having to put in so much emergency preparation. Now, I've never been on a boat for that long. I was at sea nearly 5 weeks, and so during the day we had a lot of training that we had to do on the boats as well. We had to be trained for interception. What happens if the IOF boarded us or tried to stop us? So it would become muscle memory to us how to react and what to do. Also, we had to do man overboard and things like that, preparation and training for as well. We were at sea, and that comes with its own risks in itself. When I left Barcelona, that was absolutely mental. Thousands and thousands of people all along the shore, absolutely waving us off, shouting, "Break the siege." I had a young Spanish little boy and girl. I think the girl she couldn't have been any older than like 4 years old. And she gave me two very small teddies. One was like a wolf rattle and the other was a reindeer. And she asked me to give that to a child in Gaza. And I said, I promise I'll try if we can, if I get to step foot in Gaza. So through the journey, because of the boat situation, and some of the boats got destroyed in the storm, some broke down. I actually was on 4 different boats. I was transferred once one boat broke down. I was then transferred to another boat. So these teddies came with me through all these boats, and I was very lucky. I did stay with one of my comrades. He joined. I think we'd done 3 boats together, so we were quite close by this stage. And so when I left the boats, I handed over the torch and asked him to take these teddies onto Gaza for me. And he sent me a lovely picture the other day. He made contact, and I haven't spoken to him since after the mission. And he sent me a picture, and he's there holding one of the teddies. And I actually thought that's it, that we'd lost these teddies after interception. The IOF, confiscated the boat, they confiscated everything on there. But he says as he was being taken off the boat by the IOF, he picked it up. He said, I couldn't pick up the wolf rattle. It looked a bit shaped like a gun. So I left that one. He says, but I managed to grab the other one and put it in my bag.
Oh,
And his bag was
that's
actually
sweet.
returned to him. And the teddy was in the bag still. So it's lived to see another day, and it will be on the next flotillas.
That's
Okay.
cool.
It
I just
will
wanted to
get to
ask
Gaza.
yeah. I just wanted to ask you, because you mentioned that the flotillas were attacked, and I was hoping that you would talk us a little bit through what
Yeah.
happened that day.
I was actually asleep at this point. In the morning, I had had a drip taken out of my arm. I had very acute seasickness. We had a life support boat, so that obviously everyone knew, that came with us, that followed the fleet, and they actually had to come out to a medical emergency for myself. I had been suffering with seasickness for quite a few days. I couldn't hold water down. I couldn't hold any food down. I was being quite violently sick. So on the third day, we put a call out, and the two doctors, one from Italy and one from Argentina, and they came on board. They came by raft to us. It was quite real, to be honest. And they put me up to a drip for 2 days. They gave me anti-sickness medicine in this drip, and obviously hydration. So in the morning, I'd actually had this drip just taken out of my arm, and I'd gone. I've been I'm still feeling quite poorly. Been sleeping on and off throughout the day, and so I went to bed a little bit earlier than everybody else. During the night we all had to take turns at night watch. We had to obviously keep our eyes open for interception and to make sure that we weren't attacked as well. I wasn't due on till 3 o'clock in the morning. 3 till 6 was my night duty, so I'd obviously gone to bed a little bit earlier. Obviously preparing for the night shift. And I was woken up about, I think it was about 10:30, 11 o'clock. I was woken up by two of my comrades, very calmly saying that there was a quadcopters being seen. At this point, we were all together, all the ships. We were quite some distance away, but we could all see each other, we were all in line of sight, and quadcopters had been spotted. So our training kicks in. The first thing we do is obviously we make sure we've got trousers on, we've got long sleeves in case of chemicals being thrown at us. We put on our life jackets. Now, I have an amazing team under Ebony's Voice, and they were my land team when I was on the Flotillas. So I started messaging them to let them know what was happening. And we sat up there for about 15 minutes and nothing happened. We didn't see anything. We didn't hear anything. So the order was to stand down, and we assumed they'd gone. So we all stood down. I got undressed, got back into bed, and then literally about 30 seconds later, I was woke. They came back into my room and went, "There's drones." So again, we got dressed, put our life jackets on, and as I was going up the stairs to the cockpit of the boat behind us, there was an almighty bang and an explosion. And that's when we realised that we were under attack. We went into the cockpit. I think there was 9 of us at this point in a boat that's designed for about 6 people. We could hold up to 10 people just for the day, but I don't think for a long journey. So it was quite a small boat and it was quite cramped. And we had to watch. We all came together. The fleet came together for protection, and every 10 to 15 minutes, because we were timing them, 3 drones would come in and they would just fly past us. It was extremely dark. We're in the middle of the Mediterranean. Every star in the sky was out, and we were having to look for little red flashy dots. And that's what we were, so it was quite straining on the eyes as well. And they were coming in and they were picking their targets. They were picking the boats they wanted to attack. There was a boat that next to us had an explosion, and some of the sail had been damaged. It was just like a bite had just been taken out of the sail. Again, I was watching the people on that boat, and as they brought the sail down, there was no panic. Everybody was extremely calm, and we were still watching all these drones coming in. I think we got to about 9 explosions. That's when I started realizing that I needed coffee. At this point, I thought, if I'm going to die, I at least want a cup of coffee before. And this is where I said to the boat, "Do you have a cup of sugar?" And they started laughing.
For anyone out there saying this was a pleasure cruise, indeed, it was not necessarily a pleasurable experience. The boats were small, they were cramped, and they were, under constant surveillance, being tailed by drones and quadcopters. And if you have seen anything that's been going on in Gaza for the past 2 years, plus we know what those machines are capable of. They are equipped with weapons, and they can shoot to kill. And apparently drop chemical warfare as well.
They'd actually stopped our communication. Now, some boats, that they recorded ABBA, but what we recorded was "Don't worry, be happy." That's what song blocks.
Wow. Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just, so you couldn't use the radio to call all the other boats because the signal was being jammed. But we did have internet, and so we were communicating through signal. And so we were in contact with other vessels and things. And one vessel was calling out for a mayday. And, to be at the stage where you're calling out a mayday and preparing to abandon ship, only our imaginations can work out what was happening there. And so I was messaging Ebony's Voice, my land team, and they were phoning the Welsh Coast Guard, the Welsh Coast Guard contacted the Greece Coast Guard and was relaying what was happening and explaining that we were actually suffering from a terrorist attack at that moment. I said, we got to about 10 explosions, and I can remember one of the lads from the other boat shouted, Nadia, are you making wishes? And it was just, so everyone was still very calm. We were very calm, just realizing what was happening. We weren't sure if we were going to have chemicals dropped on us. We weren't sure if it was just a stun grenade being dropped on us, or it was actually explosive devices trying to damage the sails and the mast. It was, it was a lottery. Different boats were experiencing different things throughout it. I remember seeing a drone and it was just looking at us, and it was so, and I could just imagine this little guy sat there, looking at us, and we're looking at this drone. And I can remember just getting the crew's attention. I was like, whoa, we've got a drone. And our captain went right, the drone went right, we went left, the drone went left. We just thought, oh, here we go. And it flew over, and whatever, it dropped explosive device, and we all just hit the floor with our hands over our head. The lads kind of like covered the girls, just instinct, I think. The shockwave
just to kind of highlight what you said about this being a terrorist attack, it's an interesting and true choice of words, because mind you, like, everyone on board were humanitarians, civilians, and activists. So we were all on the edge of our seats. Like, I was in communication with you, I was in communication with Kim, everyone we were like watching. Everyone was watching on the edge of their seats, keeping track, to try to track what was going on. But there was a lot of propaganda being spewed by the occupation that, Greta having, affiliation with Hamas, or trying to paint you guys as terrorists, when really they're the only ones committing terroristic attacks against boats full of civilians, unarmed
drives
civilians.
Me crazy, because you guys had no weapons, no anything, right? Except food and baby formula. And maybe some toys for kids, but yet you guys were considered the ones doing the wrong. And that doesn't make any sense
the only
to
people
anyone
that were
with a brain.
causing terror was Israel. The fact that they were bombing civilians in international water. I've heard and I've seen on social media, oh, you weren't carrying any aid. And I know our boat was carrying aid. Now, sadly, I didn't sit there and take photographs of it because I was too busy doing other things, trying to keep a working boat moving. But we had to open the boxes when the aid was delivered in Barcelona and put on the boats. And there was some aid delivered in Tunisia, and it came onto the boats. We had to open those boxes of aid to make sure no drugs had been put in there. We had to make sure no weapons had been put in there. Nobody had sabotaged the aid. So I actually opened the boxes and took all the aid out and put all the aid back into those boxes. So I know for a fact there was aid on those flotillas, because I dealt with it.
And of course, these boats can only hold so much aid, because a lot of them are pretty small in general. So I think something to remember about this is that this was not only an aid delivering mission, this was a symbolic mission of the lack of action that the governments have taken. We've watched for 2 years the governments of the world who have actual power to do something sit back, idly by, and watch a genocide unfold. So the whole reason for this mission was because people got tired of watching with all this inaction. Right? So that's why you guys finally, like, a lot of us couldn't go, but for those of you that did, it's because we're sick of watching this genocide unfold, feeling helpless.
I didn't just travel on the flotillas for myself. I traveled on the flotillas for everybody under Ebony's Voice, for you guys. I knew I was going with so much hope and love from all around the world, from everybody that I know. We knew that it was a risky mission, but we're still here. We're still here.
And it brought so much hope to the people of Gaza, because not only were we watching live, the people from Gaza were watching live the entire time, waiting on the shores for you guys to show up, ready to greet you with open arms. So also for anyone out there that was saying, oh, when you get there, just watch what they're going to do to you. They were like literally ready to welcome you guys with open arms and a party, pretty much.
I do have to say something with that, Jeannie, is, when we think about this, right? When all the boats, when they were trying to, take over all the boats, when they were approaching Gaza. We've seen videos of families being able to get food from the ocean, like pull in nets of fish because they were distracted long enough to where they were able to actually get food to the people on the shores.
So we
And so
still
if
delivered.
nothing,
Yeah, we still delivered it,
right, you still
you know,
delivered.
we
You
still
still
delivered.
delivered aid, and that's the
I,
whole point, you know?
yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think, I believe, I can't remember which ship it was, but Maria or something like that. But there was a ship that made it very close to
Very
shore. Like
close.
they were, what, 9 miles off or 30 miles off, something really
Yeah,
close. Like I was in contact with my son, Ali, and he said there was a lot of people out there watching on the shores. And he said, we can see the boats. Like we can see some of the boats. So they
yeah,
got close. You guys got
yeah,
close.
they did. They got close, and I think there's another flotilla planned for April. At the moment, 100,000 people have applied.
Wow.
Oh, it's just like, that's just awe-inspiring, you know.
So Nadia, can you give us a little bit of insight on that? Like, what's the process like when you apply? Like, you have to have your own money to go. Can you explain that a little bit for us?
Yeah, you had to pay for your own travel to. I mean, when I got to Barcelona, I arrived at midnight. Obviously, I was right at the beginning. I was in the first wave of people, really, and the logistics of this, they learned as they went along, basically. So some things went wrong, but we just have to, accept that and move on. I arrived at midnight in Barcelona, and I was meant to have someone to come meet me. Sadly, that fell through. So I was put into a mixed hostel, which was an experience in that itself. So I, I went into a mixed hostel, and the guy in the next bed, because a mixed hostel is obviously men and women share the same room. The guy in the next bed kind of like pulled open his duvet and kind of like tapped his bed for me to get into. Which I was like, oh God, no, no, thank you. I kind of like put the covers over and rolled over and got a plug in my hand in case I had a friend in the morning. And
Man.
yeah, so that was like the first experience of it. Um, but when I got to Port Forum, I went there the next day, and once the crew, most of the crew were generally male and things like that, and I became very good friends with an Irish boat. And once they heard what had happened the night before, they were like, nope, you're now staying on the boat. So I was quite lucky that I was already placed on boats, where I know a lot of other of the participants, they was being put up in another activist's home in Barcelona. Some people chose to stay in hotels, which they would have paid for themselves. So yes, when we first got there, a lot of money was from ourselves. We had to pay for our own flights. If we wanted a hotel, we paid for the hotel. If not, we could stay with other activists, or if you were lucky enough, like myself, I was already placed on a boat.
Fly. Did you contact like the Global Samud Flotilla
Yeah,
organization through social media, or you
I
knew
think it was
somebody?
you that I think it was you that sent me the link. I just hit this
Okay.
link.
Oh yeah, on Instagram. I
Yeah,
think I saw it on Instagram. Yeah.
yeah. I saw, and I just put in like what I do about the charity, my work history, really. I used to be a politician in the UK. I was the anti-war candidate for the Iraq War,
I didn't
and
know
then
that, Nadia.
That's full. Yeah.
yeah,
I forgot about that.
I stood for Parliament for over 20 years for the UK. I said I stood for against the war in Iraq. That was my first time I really went into politics. And we all knew that was a lie, didn't we? And a million Iraqis had died, and yeah, I think was it 4,000 servicemen were killed.
Yeah.
We lost hundreds as well. And then I was a parliamentary candidate for the Liberal Democrats. The reason I chose Liberal Democrats was because of the foreign policy. Pro Palestine, they were against the war in Iraq. That at the time it stood for a lot of what I was fighting in the struggle for. So yeah, so I obviously mentioned this in my application. Then I had an interview. I think I had 2 interviews, and she told me there and then. She says, normally we would have to wait for the email. She says, but I'm gonna tell you that. She goes, you're on. And I was like, I was left in a bit of limbo. I didn't know when I was going. I knew I was on. I'd say for about a week, 2 weeks, it was driving me insane. I like to plan. I didn't know when I would be going, but in that 2 weeks, I got my will sorted. I got everything. I tied up all the personal things I needed to tie up. I made sure that my daughter had, all the passwords for the banks and everything, for the doctors and things like that. I made sure I did a proper handover to Zara, and so the children would be fine. We worked out how we were going to how she was going to do school runs and things like that, because sadly, my daughter doesn't drive, I do, and I live in the middle of nowhere. So we had to pre-plan everything, how she was going to manage. But I can remember saying to Zara, I said, "Are you sure you're okay with me going?" And she just looked at me and she went, "Mum, you've got to go." And I was like, "Yeah, I do. I've got to try at least, At least I know I tried to do everything I could to make sure, we could stop trying to stop babies being starved to death." Would I go again? Absolutely. I'd say,
I'll tell you this because I think it's funny. And I think Jeannie mentioned it to me a while back, but did you know, Nadia, that we both have daughters with the same names?
no.
My daughter's
She
name
also has a
is
Zara.
Zara too.
Oh, okay.
I just thought that was funny because you kept saying Zara. I'm like,
My daughter, yeah. Oh yeah, she's a good girl. She's a good girl. I'm very lucky. I'm very lucky. But even with me going, caused friction in my own family. My family are very pro-Palestine, but I still had a lot of fallout from my own family, and I understand why. It was probably concern, because obviously they understand the Flotillas and seeing what's happened. And Zara got quite a lot of flack off some members of my family for me going in the first place. But it was a decision. I'm 47. I don't, the only person's approval I needed was my children's, and that's who I got. So yeah, would I go again? Absolutely, absolutely. Maybe by land next time, or maybe get on the boat a little bit further down the road, because we stopped
Right.
so many
We'll have to
times.
do some research on how to keep you from getting seasick next
sick.
time.
When I got off, I mean, I obviously left the Flotillas. I think it was the third day after the bombing. The next night, we were again threatened by Israel. They actually had told some MEPs who were on the Flotillas, told through the government that they were going to escalate the bombing at us and try and kill us. This was then fed back to the politicians that we had on the boats, who obviously called an emergency meeting with all crews and captains. And our captain quickly got ready and got the boat ready after this meeting. And I grabbed him and I was like, "What do you know that I don't know?" And he looked at me and he just went, "Israel's threatening to kill us." And I was like, "What?" We're, unarmed civilians, people from all over the world. And so we made a run for Greek water, and the sea was quite rough that day. And I was actually on a live with Steve at the time, and I had to come off
I
the live
remember.
with Steve. And we made a break, but that's re-triggered my seasickness. And so then I was back to vomiting again and throwing up and feeling terrible. And we called up the doctors, and it was, I would end up with another drip in my arm. And I had to think about it, and think, well, if I end up with another drip in my arm, there's a good chance I'm trying to break the siege of Gaza with a drip in my arm and a cannula. And then I thought, if we're intercepted, I'm so vulnerable being like that. But then
Right.
I'm also making, the crew would be more protective over me, because obviously I'm ill and I've got a cannula in, and if the IOF had grabbed it or dragged it out, that could have caused a retaliation from the crew, because obviously there'd been blood. And I had to sit there and really think about the mission, and what was more important, me staying on the boat or coming off to protect the mission. And me coming off was going to protect the mission. That's the decision I made. So I actually left the Flotillas at Crete. I think we were 4 days from interception at that point.
Yes.
And I came ashore on a small fishing village where there was no port authorities. I was met by activists, taken 2 hours away to a city. I still don't know where I was. It took me ages to work out I was in Crete, I was like, where am I in the world? And yeah,
Yeah.
I was
So
detained
I
by
think with
the
your
Greek.
condition, the way you were, that was a good decision that you did come off, because we
Yeah.
know what Israel does, and whether they were bluffing or not, which I think they were bluffing about the killing you guys, because And it just goes to show also how scared and how threatened they felt by these ships full of literal civilians just trying to break the siege carrying aid, right? Because we know
Yeah.
what the crew members who did get intercepted went through after that. And for those of you that don't know, a lot of them, including Greta Thunberg, were subjected to different forms of torture, and they were kept in really horrible conditions, treated very inhumanely, and given regular visits by Ben Gavir, calling
Yeah.
them terrorists and humiliating them and things like that.
I don't think they were
Really, really
humiliated.
brave
I
of
don't think
everyone that
Ben
did that.
Gavir I think he just, it's just, you just look at him, you can just see he's a fat pig, can't you? I just, oh, sorry.
Yes,
Even thinking about it makes me
for sure.
skinny
Don't be
crawl,
sorry.
you know?
No.
But, when he was there calling them terrorists, not for 1 second do I believe any of my comrades who by at this stage I'd got to know extremely well, and they are the most beautiful souls I've ever met, I don't for 1 second believe they were intimidated at all by Ben Gavir calling them a terrorist. I think if they could have laughed, they would have. They didn't laugh because they have to de-escalate at all stages, and laughing in someone's face is not de-escalating. But I don't believe for 1 second any of my comrades would have been intimidated by Ben Gavir. Not at all.
I did hear somebody yell out a free Palestine while they had
Yeah, they
everyone
did.
detained
Yeah,
sitting
they
on
all
the
started
floor.
chanting Free Palestine. They all chanted Free Palestine and they cut the recording quickly. So, Ben
I
Gavir,
bet.
yeah,
I bet.
yeah.
So Nadia, you mentioned that you have a couple events coming up about the flotilla. Do you want to tell us about those events
Yeah,
you have?
on Sunday we've got the UK delegation in Manchester. We're all coming together. It'll be the first time that we've all been together since the mission. And I'm really excited about seeing everybody, hearing everybody else's different experience. I know that I was probably one of the only people that came off the boats and had a horrendous time. And had my own little side adventure, side quests going on. So yeah, I'm really excited to see everyone. And I'm putting in plans of what we're doing. Are we all back on in April? Who's coming back on? So yes, we're having a meeting and a catch up on Sunday in Manchester, which I'm really looking forward to. And on Wednesday, I have a lady phoning me to ask about my experience. What she wants to interview me. They are making a documentary series about the Flotillas, and she wants to hear my story, see if my story gets played out, and the fact that I went through bombing and I was on 4 different boats at
Yes.
one point, and I was the only person that had the medical doctors out. I was like, oh my God, this will be my kids were like, oh
Hey, that's gotta be really cool to watch that back
yeah.
and see everyone's experience in hindsight and
It won't
just
be me on
how
there.
it
It'll
all
be somebody
unfolded.
playing me. Well, I won't be. It won't be me. It'll be an actor
Oh,
playing
someone will
me.
play you. Oh,
Yeah,
you get your own
yeah.
Use
So
your own
that's
actress.
actor,
what I'm doing.
actress.
Yeah, or an
That's cool.
actress playing me, yeah. So yeah, it'll be quite interesting to see and quite excited for that. That's happening on Wednesday
Right.
and for those first steps to be start taken. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I said, it's been the first time in history that so many people from so many countries did something like that. And, now we've set that precedent. It's just going to keep happening and happening and happening until we break that siege. Absolutely.
Yep. What's started with one boat and was one boat and one boat turned into, how
History.
many boats were there? 70 boats?
There was over 50, but 47 actually made it to
Okay.
Gaza because of breakdowns and all
Okay.
sorts of things, So, and we lost a couple on the way, but we now know that 50 boats was a challenge for Israel to intercept.
Yeah. They
Hence
got
why
very close. So
why one got so close, and it took over 14 hours to intercept everybody. So imagine what
wow.
happens
I
with a
imagine
1,000
next
boats.
time they may not be able to stop a whole
Thousand, I
flood
can say,
of,
1,000 boats.
boats. So yeah, that's really cool. I love it.
Yeah,
That's cool.
absolutely. And we will break that siege, it's just a matter of time, and the siege has been broken before. There was an old ladies' boat that went, and it was just women, and they broke it. They got
Nice.
through.
So I'm really excited for you with the movie coming out, or the documentary, whatever you want to call it, the documentary that's coming. You'll definitely have to let us know when that is
Yeah,
out so we
yeah,
can have our little parties and watch it together.
yeah.
Right.
I think
Popcorn.
that'd be a lot of fun. But I also wanted to bring up a quick topic about your NGOs and your what you're doing now that you're back home with your Ebony's Voice. Ebony's Voice is a project you started years ago, and I was hoping you'd tell us a little bit more about that too.
Yeah, I started Ebony's Voice about 7 years ago in the UK, and we were an advocacy service for children with hidden disabilities in the UK, making sure that they had the correct support at school, um, and making sure that children with these hidden disabilities were being diagnosed correctly. After September the 7th, and I took my daughter to a national demo, we made a decision to change the charity and support families in Gaza in conflict zones. And how we do this, we offer sponsorship where a family has complete vetting through Ebony's Voice, and we have a sponsor who again is vetted, and we match them together, and the person who's sponsoring the family in Gaza will try and help run their GoFundMe campaign or Chuff campaign and fundraise in their community, and just be just to be a friend, to the person in Gaza, and for the person in Gaza to know that they're not on their own, and they've got that support from the outside world. And yeah, it's done amazing. We've done really, it's works, and that is the main. There's so many families now under Ebony's Voice that are getting that support, so which is brilliant. So since I've been back, most of our families under Ebony's Voice have asked me personally to get them out of Gaza. Even when I was on the Flotillas, we have a young lad, and he was like, can I get on the boat with you? Can you get me out of Gaza? So I've tried every pathway for the last year to try and get people out of Gaza, and I'm coming up against a block every time. And there is a scheme that was opened in the UK by a lady called Vicky, and it's called community sponsorship, and it was done for Syrian refugees. And what it basically entails is, I'll use the example from Syria. A family came over from Syria into the community. The community would pay for the accommodation for the family. They would make where the family came into the community, especially in Wales. In Wales, we have very small communities, quite rural communities. We have schools that are not full. We have GP surgeries that are not full in Wales. So we have room. So
There's no reason why they wouldn't be able to come and
exactly,
assimilate into your
yeah,
country.
exactly. So what we're suggesting, with the Syrians, how it works with Syrians is they come into our community, we pay for the accommodation, we make sure that where the family is getting placed into the community is they're not going to be a strain on a system that's already strained. We will help them set up with work. We'll give them Welsh and English language lessons as well. And because the community are sponsoring them and bringing them into the heart of the community, they're wanted, they're integrated. And so we are trying to reopen that scheme for people in Gaza. We're at the moment lobbying government. I do have support from my MP, which is Andrew Ranger, who thinks the scheme is a good idea to use in the UK. So yeah, we are. It's a Welsh initiative, So I'm working with Vicky, who runs Quitch Pals, and me and herself. We've teamed up together with other NGOs and smaller charities and things, especially charities to do with immigration and refugees. And we're all working together, lobbying government at the moment to have this implemented into the UK. It looks like we will, hopefully, um, you know, and then we will fundraise, and we will, work as a community, and we will get the accommodation, and we will put the family in the heart of our community. And it's for up to 2 years. Now, after 2 years, they can return back to Gaza. Absolutely, they should have the right of return. But if they don't, hopefully we can put in for the asylum, or if they might even want to stay in the UK. They might want to go on to another country. They'll have that freedom which they've never had before. So yeah, I'm
Well,
really.
inshallah, all of that comes to pass. And it's a really amazing work that you've been doing. And just really proud and honored to be, by your side in all of this. And I think, inshallah, Palestine will be free, and we will get to see the day that our people get liberated. And just thank God for everybody that's
At the moment,
advocating.
the amount of chemicals that have been dropped, and the building. I mean, Gaza is obliterated. It's gone. and the buildings that had asbestos, computers, everything like that have been smashed. All that poison is in the air, it's in the soil, it's in the water supply. We've got children at the moment being born in Gaza with birth defects, through that poison, through that toxic. So if we can offer respite for 2 years, I mean, we did it for the children of Chernobyl. The UK opened its doors to the children of Chernobyl and gave them fresh air respite. We've done it for Ukraine. We've done it for Syria. We need to be doing it for Gaza, and as I said, at the moment, if people want to support our campaign, we've got a petition, we've got a campaign going. Please look at our website. There's a website direct for this. Kim will obviously post that link for you. So yeah, and if you feel that your community, would like to welcome a family from Gaza into their community, I'm very lucky where I live. I've already spoke to the community councillors who are very, who are on board with this. My neighbours are on board with this. My MP's on board with this. So we're, in my area, we're building up that memento. So the family that I've been trying to personally keep alive, and obviously I've grown very close to the part of my family, to try and give their children a chance. It's what we owe them, especially in the UK. We're complicit. We paid for what happened in Gaza. It was our bombs. It was our
Ours too.
opponents in these planes. We need to be held accountable for that and to help the people of Gaza.
I just wanted to ask you what you thought about, because I know this was I don't know if it was a month ago or maybe a little bit longer ago. We were hearing news on the other side of the pond that there was a lot of disruption happening in the UK with immigration going on over there. Has that
there is.
subsided?
Yeah, at the no. To be honest, we've had racism in the UK for a very long time. I have mixed race children of Kashmiri descent. Their heritage is from a Muslim background. My children couldn't play out in English cities without being called the P word. Go home, your mum's cooking a curry. I used to actually had to bring my children from England back home to Wales in the summer holidays just so they could play out, so they could have some kind of childhood. That was why one decision was for me to move back home for my children. So there's always been racism. We're called United Kingdom, and it makes me laugh because we're not very united at all. That's a lie there. That's the propaganda. We're not, United Kingdom is not united. Yeah, so but our scheme, how we're doing our scheme, and we need, the far right to back it, because they're on about immigration, and we're getting we're overrun. All these men are coming through, and our scheme is how it should work. We should be placing people in communities where the communities want them, where they're not going to be a drain on services. It's it's our policy on immigration that's completely failing, and that's not because of I'm no fan of the Labour government, but it's not the Labour government's fault. It was actually because of the Conservative government 14 years ago, and how they changed the processing, and we're housing immigrants in our hotels at the moment because there's such a backlog. We can't work, because there's such a backlog, we can't go through all the people that have a right. Because being an asylum seeker, it's not a crime in the UK. You can be an asylum seeker, and you have a right to be an asylum seeker, especially if your country's been bombed, you're at risk of being murdered. Absolutely should be able to apply to other countries. And the UK should, we should be opening our doors to help people like this. The problem is
Well,
the
it's
backlog.
extremely hypocritical, your government and our government here in the
We
US, to
colonize
say
the world.
that they don't have enough money to take care of people when they're over here funding billions of dollars to war machines and foreign entities. Like,
Yeah,
Exactly.
give me a break.
we colonized the whole world. We went into their countries. I mean, we stole their precious gems, and our British museum's full of stolen artifacts from around the world. And then we're going, yeah, we can invade you, destroy your country, but no. You stay where you are. You stay where it's absolutely
Right.
hypocritical of our country. So the scheme that we're trying to open, is absolutely one of the better ways to do immigration, and to solve the problem that we've got, because people are, oh, we need to stop immigration. You're never going to stop it. You're never going to stop it. This country was built on immigration. We had Anglo-Saxons, we've had Vikings, and we can go on and on and on and on. Great Britain has always survived because people have come into this country, and more people leave this country anyway than actually come in. If we didn't have immigration, or we wouldn't have an NHS. And that's exactly what Reform are hoping to do, is collapse our NHS. So we end up with a private health care system like America has. But that means my daughter will not be able to get medication that she needs to function. And many people I know, children, will be in great danger with not having an NHS. And it's just a load of nonsense. And for the media to throw it, to scare people. I mean, racism, people used to be scared to be seen as racist in the UK. They're open about it now. Very open.
That's very across the board, I think, with many countries, including ours. People that I have known most of my life, and finding out that they're extremely racist is like, because now it's considered okay for you to be disgusting. Well,
Yeah.
it's not a big secret anymore. And it just like, it baffles my brain every time like you hear somebody speak in the way that they're going to speak about racism. And it's like,
Well, especially in these giant settler colonies, which is what the United States and the United Kingdom are, it's
and
not that the
Israel.
racism is just like, it's not just happening now. It's always been there, but people are feeling safe now because of the people in power and what's happening around the world to come out and just be outright, put it all out on the table. So when you have societies that are founded by systemic racism, genocide, and slavery, it's a massive underlying problem that I think a lot of us are finally starting to
I
see
think,
because it's been
the
rearing
UK,
its ugly
people are
head.
amazed when I turn around and say the UK's always been racist. Absolutely. The fact that, my daughter's 19, 10, 15 years ago, she couldn't play outside because she was experiencing racism from children. I've seen, children scribble stuff in books, and these are white British children saying, your dad's a curry muncher and all sorts of stuff like that. Racism has always been there, and it's just been fueled and fueled by the governments, because let's not look at ourselves and think, well, we need this expensive house, or we need this new expense, or we need to buy this. We'll blame the poor people coming into the country. We won't fund the
Right.
NHS.
Which is really why all of this is happening too in the
Yeah,
first place in Palestine, because of racial supremacy and Zionism, it's a supremacist ideology founded on apartheid and a system that does not see the native people of the land as equal, because their presence there it signifies that, the ones that are trying to colonize are
it's
not the original
capitalism, though, isn't it?
not the original inhabitants of the land.
Well, it's capitalism, isn't it? Because capitalism will first of all attack, it goes for the working class, and it squeezes them. But once they start running out, they've got no money or got no thing to contribute, then it moves up the line and it goes to the middle class. At the moment in the UK, the middle class have been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. The elites, they need to blame someone else. Capitalism is going to collapse our civilization. There is no doubt about it. I'm a socialist. I think most mothers are socialists without realizing, we all work together for the best outcome of the child.
Mm.
That's
Mhm.
socialism. We work together for the best outcome for your community, your child, whoever it is. That is what socialism is. That is the grassroots of socialism. And most women are. And it's trying to get that across to people, And people, oh, socialism doesn't work. But it works for the schools if they're properly funded. It works for the health service if it's properly funded. It works for the police service if it's properly funded. And I think we need to get rid of capitalism. That's what's killing our planet. It's killing our societies. It's killing humanity. These multimillionaires, the people that make the bombs. Why do you think we've had so many wars for 20 years?
Yeah.
Look who benefits. Who benefited from Iraq? The weapons companies. The only people that benefited. And America, because it took its oil. First thing they did was secure the oil fields in the Iraq war. That tells everybody everything they needed to know. if that's the first thing you secure was an oil field, you know?
It's
So
always
it's
about money.
Always about the
always about
resources
money.
and the land, right?
Yeah, but you
So
know,
what do you ladies
eventually,
think? It's unfortunately, our societies are built on the backs of, indigenous people, and like what we're seeing around the world right now, not only in Palestine, but in places like Sudan and Congo and Venezuela, all these places. Like, these are not like internal conflicts, as they like to say. These are genocides being committed by world superpowers in the name of resources and land theft. And so it's up to all of us that have any kind of privilege, like sitting here right now, to use our voices, to use our platforms, to use our resources and abilities in order to advocate and stand with all the oppressed people of the world. So with that being said, no one's free until everyone is free.
So, Nadia, thank you so much for joining us. That was an amazing conversation that we just had. And if anyone's looking for Ebony's voice or Nadia's social links, I'll have those all down below for you to go and follow. If you're not following me and GD, please make sure that you do that as well. And thank you again, and we will see you all next time.